whether it's through paint or clay or through performance or through movement and dance or through writing a poem. But an artist is someone who feels deeply and passionately enough to want to express it through some material or mode of expression.
I think I would agree with that. I think for me, what drew me toward wanting to paint was a deep appreciation for the beauty that just seems so apparent in the world to me, whether it's the sunset or the beauty of a flower, or there's just something, I don't know, there's just something so celebrational about dwelling on that which is beautiful, or finding the beauty in something that, in a scene that you're appreciating. I never seem to be able to do it justice. I always seem to fall short of the real beauty that is in front of me, because I come at it from a spiritual place too, and I really believe that God is like the ultimate artist, and that I'm always just a poor imitation at best.
And that's why we keep striving.
Yeah.
We keep trying. I think that's also an important ingredient as an artist, is to, just passionately pursue, always feeling that you can do better in the next one or the next one. And I think that's just part of the DNA of an artist that strings us along through this artistic journey.
I would agree. I liken it sometimes to a round of golf. I have played golf, but I don't consider myself a golfer. But I know from experience that people who golf a lot often say that it's that one good shot that you hit every once in a while that keeps you coming back for more. And I've also heard it compared to marriage, that it's those magic moments that you experience between all those mundane things that you share that sustains a marriage. So maybe some of that same mentality has to go into being an artist too. I think
that sounds about right.
I think grit and not admitting defeat, or carrying on despite a sense of defeat or momentary defeat, is important. William, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think you guys said it very eloquently.
Yeah, I think, artist, I said that I was in the closet for many years because I was very hesitant to define myself as an artist. I just painted privately before many people even knew that I painted at all. I think I'm inherently kind of a shy person, believe it or not, but I am. And when I think I felt a lot of risk attached to telling other people. Do any of you guys out there feel as if it's a little bit risky to tell people that you're an artist? Because once you do, I think you do sort of feel sometimes as if you open yourself up to people thinking, well, who does she think she is? Or who does he think he is? Anybody else feel that way? I know that. I think that was why I was hesitant to let people know, is because I was afraid of what they might think of what I was producing.
I find more that they expect me to be Picasso or Rembrandt, or when you say artist, they don't see gradations of artists. And so then they'll, oh, can you paint this? Can you paint that?
Yeah, Carol, I recognize your voice, and I think that's very true. I think that fear of critique, or that fear of being open to the appraisal of others is a little bit intimidating. I think that's true. Victoria Alger asks, Maura, do you feel a sense of pressure to perform, or in the case of being an artist, to produce artwork for the gallery, maybe beyond what you would want to do to satisfy your own passion?
Thank you for that question, Victoria. I just recently retired from over 40 5 years of teaching art at one level or another. And so the past 2 years since retirement, I really, I feel like I'm catching up for some lost time, although of course I created art and paintings all along, but now I have that devoted time where I'm in the studio at 9 in the morning and I leave sometime in the afternoon. And I just can't get enough of it, to be quite honest, right now. So although I'm preparing a series of paintings right now for an exhibition, I am loving every second of it. I'm loving being in my studio. I'm trying new things. I'm doing some gilding these days that I've had up on the shelf for about 2 or 3 years now, and I'm finally taking that down and experimenting with some of that, those materials. So I can't say that I feel pressure at the moment. I have tons of paintings in my flat files, so I've got plenty of work here sitting in drawers. So I don't feel like I need to build up a body of work. I've got that going. So I must say at this moment in time, it's just pure enjoyment, and I'm not feeling particular pressure to produce for a gallery. I do have a gallery here in town that I show with, but yeah, so I hope that answered your question.
I would like to ask another question then that's been posed about asking if an artist must have a particular style for which he or she has a passion in order to be called an artist. I think this is a great question, and this has been one I'm going to just jump right in with because I think that having something that you're known for absolutely is helpful in terms of branding and just sort of people having an idea of what they can expect from you. But if you're like me and you are interested in a lot of different things, I consider myself an artist, and I think it would be hard to pinpoint what it is exactly that I do. I'm known for being a watercolor and water media person, but I also have oil paintings in my collection, and I do a lot of mixed media too. So I would say that no, you don't have to have a particular style. I think you just have to be producing. Picasso, I mean, if you think about him, he was a sculptor, he was a painter, he painted pottery, he dabbled in a lot of different realms. So I would like to think that I'm not breaking new ground by being in a lot of different realms. Do you guys have another way of looking at that?
Well, I think one of the reasons that comes up with artists is driven a lot by the gallery and museum institutions, because a gallerist, if they're selling, if it's not an academic gallery, if they're actually trying to sell an artist, they want to understand what that artist's work is about, how it looks, and if they should have a collector that they know that should invest in that artist, because they know in the long time that artist is going to stick with it and they're going to keep moving. And they don't particularly like artists to go off in a different direction unless it's in the same style. So I think that's a lot of times where people feel like they can't let themselves go and experiment. And what I've always said is that as an artist, it's our job to explore and challenge ourselves and use different materials. But if you're going to have a show, you want to have a cohesive thought and style with that show to illustrate what you were questioning, what you were trying to answer with your art. And I think that separates the people that just, you know, jump from medium to medium to medium while they explore what's really right for them. And, you know, Picasso was like that because he did jump around mediums, but he had a thread that went through all those different pieces and questions that he was exploring with Cubism and the like.
Yeah.
And I think too, in speaking to emerging artists, I would advise not to get hung up on style, on the term style. I think emerging artists, like most artists, I mean, we're always discovering new things about ourselves. But especially for young artists, I think you need to experiment and try different materials, different modes of expression, study with a variety of different people. You don't want to get plugged into someone else's style or to an early style of your own that might be hindering your growth. So, you know, just try a variety of things. And remember, no matter what you do, if you're doing it honestly from your heart, it's you. Whether it's your style that you're going to have for the rest of your life or not, it doesn't matter. It's your work. So I guess my advice is that I think that William hit the nail on the head with looking at some of the more formal artistic businesses as needing a stylistic aspect of a person's artwork in terms of sales and in terms of categorizing them for exhibition and so forth. But in terms of your personal studio practice, stay wide open as a young artist. Learn not only from living artists, learn from your predecessors that you know, look at through art history, and give it a good shot for yourself, because all of that vocabulary you're learning from all those different people, as well as your personal experiment, will eventually find its way into your art making.
I can't agree more. Let's just dig into that just a little bit further, maybe from a different angle. What would be your advice on how to find your voice as an artist? Maura, I'm almost getting the impression that one of your pieces of advice would be to study with as many people as possible.
Yes, and to study a variety of 2D and 3D visual art experiences. When I think back to my own life drawing courses as a young undergrad, we also had figure modeling courses. And believe it or not, when I do a figure now, when I'm painting a figure in watercolor, the experience that's most clear to me is actually modeling the figure in clay. So as I'm painting, that three-dimensional experience is kind of imprinted, and it helps me to create volume in the human figure that I'm painting. So I think, you know, sometimes young artists in particular like to categorize themselves as either 2D or 3D minded people. But I would advise to embrace both types of art in your learning process.
That's really interesting. I know I have a lot of my students who begin painting and you know start there, but they always say, well, do I have to know how to draw? And I always feel like the answer is no, you don't have to know how to draw in order to paint. But if you don't spend some time with drawing, you'll hit a block in your painting, because similar to what you were talking about with the three-dimensional, if you can't render something in pure value, which is what a sketch is all about, it's all dark and light, right? If you can't wrap your mind around how to do that with in a sketch, then you're probably going to have a difficult time doing it with paint. So yeah, I would say, I would echo that, that when it comes to finding your voice as an artist, that studying with as many people whom you admire is key. For me, I sought out painters that I admired their work and I heard were good teachers, and I studied and studied and studied and studied. I thought about going to art school, but for me, I wanted to kind of approach it a little bit differently, and I have no regrets looking back. William, how would you suggest that people find their voice as an artist? What would be your 2 cents on that?
Well, for me, one of the things early on that I was told was that the question of how do you get a show?
Mm.
And this is different than being in a group show where you just show whatever you've created, and maybe it has to do with a particular theme. But how do you get a solo show? And what I was told by an artist who was very successful was, you need to find a subject matter that you are passionate about, and so passionate about that you will spend the next 3 to 5 years painting it again and again and again and again. And so that, to me, is how you find your voice, because and that's one of the things that I did in the beginning of my career, is I had said, okay, I'm out of corporate America. I was laid off. How do I make a living as an artist? And I knew that there were, many different ways. One was the subscribers you mentioned about. But I came up with this idea. I was living in Texas. I had my studio there, of that what's the most iconic thing that people would like in Texas? And that was the cowboy boot.
Mm.
And because of my graphic design background, I said, I'm going to give myself a creative challenge. And that was that every day I was going to paint a 12-inch by 12-inch painting that used the shape of the cowboy boot, but it could be landscapes, it could be portraits, it could be abstracts, anything to communicate, but using that shape. They began to be known as Billy Boots. I did one every day. I posted it on social media. I asked people what things that they wanted me to paint for ideas so I could keep it up. I then did unveilings of a month's worth of paintings. But forcing me to do that, I learned a lot about what were my strengths in painting, what I liked, the days that were really challenging and struggling for me, and the days that I was just pure joy. And from a business side of it, I had made the thought of, well, if I could create a painting every day and I could sell that painting for $100, that at the end of the year, I would make roughly $36,000. And that was better than working at McDonald's. So that was my enter into being a professional artist. And I think that's the main thing. If you look back on artists, all the famous artists painted and painted and painted, and they challenged themselves, they asked themselves questions, and they tried to get it out in whatever mediums they were doing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I've heard it said that you should try to paint 500 bad paintings, because nobody will intentionally do 500 bad paintings, but at least if that's your goal, you're going to have some winners in there. And I love that concept of trying to pick a subject that you could spend the next 3 to 5 years painting happily. That's a really good little nugget. I like it. I like it a lot.
And I think oftentimes too, when artists speak about working in series, it's the same idea of investigating a topic or a subject matter or the elements in a way that you keep pushing. You keep pushing through problems that you come up against in painting that particular subject. And so you just emerge and grow in a way that wouldn't happen if you bounced around, with painting or drawing or sculpting a different object every time.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I know I started a Martin Luther King series of portraits a little over a year ago, and since then I've done about I think this is going to be my 5th one, and I've just been enjoying it. Every one forces me to dig a little bit deeper and to go in a slightly different direction, and I love that idea. And you're working on your river series.
Yes, yeah. And that's, it's been wonderful. We travel out in the pontoon boat up and down the rivers and creeks and backwaters of Georgetown into Winyah Bay and down into the salt marsh. And not only the landscape and sea and waterscapes are gorgeous, but meeting people along the way that work or live along the river has been really very interesting. And that's where I get to pull my love for figure painting into the water or river series. People who work and live along the river are, some of the offshoots
Right.
of the landscape.
Well, I think working a series is definitely probably the best advice we can give people about finding their voice. And I love the idea of the concept of finding something that really moves you and trying to do that as part of that series. Let's talk a little bit. Let's kind of shift a little bit. If you guys have any questions out there that you'd like us to address, please feel free to put those in the chat. But let's talk about advice on people for getting their work out there. How important is affiliation with a gallery?
William, do you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I have a very interesting perspective on that. And I think I am very anti-gallery, even though I myself have a gallery. And the reason is that gallery owners don't necessarily want you to connect with the collectors.
Mm.
And I believe in an age of social media and being able to do that. I'm very supportive of the artist that wants to self-represent. And that's what I consider myself. I'm a self-representing artist. And it's up to me to promote my art. It's up to me to have relationships with collectors and then to learn and cultivate and grow that collector base. And so for me, I don't think it's necessarily important in this day and age to have gallery representation. However, I wrote a note to myself of as an artist, all the people that you need to pay, such as you may need to pay an accountant bookkeeper, you may need to pay a framer, you may need to pay a photographer, you may need to pay somebody or for software for an email list, you may need to pay for a virtual assistant, you may need to pay coaches and teachers, you may need to pay a lawyer, you need to pay a web designer, you need to buy art supplies, you need to pay a maid or landscape if you have a property. You're going to need things for your printer. You're going to need to pay for models. You're going to need to pay for mentors and studio assistants. You're going to need to pay a landlord. So all of these things are things that you're going to have to pay if you go into the business of being an artist. And so I think then it becomes is, who are your connections for the art business? You know, is it institutional connections? Is it venues like not just a gallery that represents you, but when I started out, my friend Jim Frederick and I, we would hang our art anywhere. Coffee shops, optician, doctor's offices, coffee shops, galleries. We even did our own, turned out our residence. We had an apartment that had entry on the first floor, and we took all the furniture out and moved it into one room, and then we hung our art on the walls, and we invited everybody we know to come to an art show. So I think there's very creative ways that you can get your art out there. And then this is where I see the one thing that a lot of artists, beginning artists, don't do. And that is get the information of the collectors and the people interested in their art and who wants to buy their art, including family and friends, because they're your first biggest support group. And I think from that, you learn to grow that relationship. And that's one of the things that enabled me to become a full-time artist in the beginning with my WHM Foundation, where I have several collectors that pay me a monthly fee. And that monthly fee goes to paying the foundation of my bills for rent and utilities, so that I don't have to worry every month, how many paintings do I need to sell to be able to pay the rent?
That's just a genius concept. I've never heard of anybody else doing that, and I'm so glad you mentioned that as part of your tactic for covering all those costs, and those costs are real. I think a lot of us who paint and who want to call ourselves an artist, I think we forget that in doing that sometimes there's a certain business component to that if we're going to begin selling our work. And I want to echo exactly what you said about getting information. If you give your work to somebody because they express a desire and an interest in it, they are a collector of your work. And I really would encourage you, any of you out there, to begin cultivating a list of these people and getting their email address, getting their physical address. In case you have a show, it's been my experience that the people who have previously purchased my work are probably among the most likely to purchase it again. Because they like me, because they like my work, because they feel they have a relationship with me. And it's not that you want to use your friends, but it's just a reality that I think people who buy original work are very frequently looking for that special connection with the artist that just doesn't happen when you get a piece of work from Target. Do you guys have that same experience, that the people who purchase your work have often purchased before?
Yes, yeah.
I think that's
I
something.
certainly do.
I think that's something that's got to be true for other people. If it's true for me, they want to support me because they love me, or they kind of like me, or they at least like my work. And for me, I have to say, that I try to make part of my mission when I sell paintings to give a portion to charity. And I know that a few of my collectors really buy into that as well. They like my mission, and they like the idea that when they support me and what I'm doing, they're also able to support a worthy cause that they might have a heart for. So yeah, William, I wanted to also double back to the idea that galleries don't facilitate that. They want the connection to those collectors. And in fact, when I've sold my work, well, I won't say where, at a local gallery here, I made the specific request that they share with me who it is that purchased my work. And often, repeatedly, I had to make that request and still was never given that information on who those people were, because like you say, they want those customers, and they don't necessarily want for there to be an immediate connection between the buyer and me.
Yep.
I need to take a course from you, William, on the business of art.
Well, I offer that. So
Okay.
He's available. He's available for any of us, I think.
All right.
Let's address some of these questions that have come in via chat real quickly. I'm curious, how many people become art collectors patron of a particular artist? That's just got to vary depending on, you know, the amount of sales that you've had and the amount of years that you've been doing this. Do you guys have anything to say about that particular question? How do you determine how to price your work when someone wants to purchase your watercolor? Let's talk a little bit about pricing. How do you go about that?
Well, you go ahead, William, and I'll follow.
Well, I was just gonna use the Andy Warhol quote, which whatever you can get away with.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there's that sweet spot, right? But Maura, what were you going to say?
Well, I guess I was going to you know, answer that in such a way that if you considered first, you know, your years of experience, that's something that can go into you know, a cost for a work of art. If you're a student and you're still learning, the cost might be a little bit lower than it's going to be once you've graduated from your undergrad or graduate level, or several workshops that you've attended that have, you know, helped you to grow. So those, you know, that student grade as opposed to the professional grade would be one consideration. Of course, the raw materials that you put into the piece, whether it's the, you know, some percentage of paint, paper, framing, perhaps advertising, whatever else you may have done in order to make that sale. And I think it's not a bad idea when you're starting out as an emerging artist to maybe go by even something as tangible as size, because the buying public gets size or scale as one element for pricing. Like a large painting is understood to be more expensive than maybe a small 8x10 painting. So if you work in standard sizes, which might be another suggestion for emerging and young artists who are just coming along, you might say that your 8x10 paintings, you know, are let's say $150 a piece. And as your size goes up and material costs go up, so does the price. But I think there are some tangibles that you can put into the mix to help you decide what your cost is. And you also probably have to look at your geography. You know, where are you living? What is the, you know, how much can you ask if you're living in a small rural town as opposed to city? So there's a lot of variables going into, I think, deciding on your price. But I think once you decide on where you're going to start, you have to be relatively consistent and not get emotionally involved, so that because you like a painting that might happen to be of a special person, say, that you're going to charge more for that when you've just sold the same size painting of a figure to someone else for much, much more. You know, I mean, so there has to be some consistency in your in your selling price?
I try to always ask myself too, what's it worth to me? What's it worth to me to let this painting go? And sometimes a painting is worth more to me than what people might be willing to pay, and so
Yeah.
I just resign myself to not sell that one. Or
Right.
I tend to ask people to pay more for a larger piece, and so I try to charge approximate numbers by the square inch, and that sort of reflects, in the price. At the bigger the more square inches, the larger the price. And I do charge more for commissions than I do for paintings that I've just felt moved in order to paint on my own, because sometimes in taking on a commission, you're taking on someone else's passion, and to me that's a little harder sometimes, not always, but sometimes. So I do charge more for commissions as a result of that. But I think the idea of being consistent is a good one. And if you sell an 11 by 15 for $200, that collector's probably not going to appreciate it if the next 11 by 15 they see on your Instagram post is only going for 100. So you want to make people feel as if there's going to be a solid value attached to your paintings. One of the things that I do to promote a relationship with my collectors is that I offer a 10% discount forever if you've bought one of my paintings. And that's kind of a privilege I extend to people who have purchased from me. And then I also offer a future trade-in of, if they decide that my painting no longer goes with their couch, they can trade it in for a painting of equal or greater value. With the idea being that I don't want my work sitting in somebody's attic or in somebody's basement. I would rather that they have something that they love, and not have any regrets attached to dealing with me as an artist. So that's another little thing that I do. And I think people appreciate that. There's a little sense of security that I feel coming over people when I tell them that. Do you guys have anything that you do that builds relationships with your collectors?
Rebecca, do you, when you do a trade-in, how do you value that trade-in?
Well, I look at what they've paid. I look at what they paid in the past, and then I just I've never had to do it, honestly, Victoria. I've never had to do it. But my plan is that if and when somebody brings it back to me to make good on that promise, I would just take in mind what they paid, and I would take the painting that they purchased back. I wouldn't just let them have both paintings, but I would take the one that I had them purchase in the initial one back, and then I would let them go shopping. I'd let them go shopping in my account and see if there's something else that they feel would work better for them. And as long as it's of equal or greater value, it's theirs, and they just pay the difference in price.
You know anybody that's, as an artist, that's done a trade-in from your experience? Other artists, have they encountered that?
I got the idea from my good friend and mentor, Carlin Holman. And and this is something I would absolutely recommend all emerging artists do, is to look out there in the world, in the marketplace, and say, who's doing what you'd like to do? And find out what they do. Talk to them, pick their brain, model yourself after them. And I've found artists to be such a generous community as a rule, willing to share, willing to be supportive of one another in such wonderful ways. But the answer, I hope I answered your question, Victoria, that I know that Carlin Holman did have somebody bring a painting back once, and you want to know the reason why? It's pretty funny. As a watercolorist, you know, we often have the watermark on our paper. And she had painted the painting that this woman had purchased with the watermark upside down in the right upper corner. And it drove her patron crazy. After, I mean, and so much so that she brought it back to Carlin and she said, I just can't have it this way. And so Carlin allowed her to, you know, to figure it out and get another one. But it's, you know, you just never know, I guess, what's going to end up making your customer happy. And I guess for me, it's more important that in my customer's mind, their exchange with me be 100% positive than it is for me to make money off of them. You know, it's nice when you can do both, right? It's nice when you can do both. So let's see here. If there's any other. Oh, Keith, yes, Keith makes a point here that non-artists just can't grasp the amount of money invested in paper and in materials and in education and in all of these other realms that William touched on, the things that cost an artist. And oh my gosh, they do think that, they do expect things to be free. I don't know about all of you, but everybody wants something for free. I mean, it's how do you deal with that when people come to you and they ask you for freebies? What's your response, and like what's your criteria?
Are you talking about in terms of a donation or just someone that likes a painting and wants it?
Let's talk about donation, I guess, just at first.
Okay.
Well, for me, I look at what is the donation going to do for me and my career. And so I look at who are they marketing to? Is that the buyers of my kind of art? I also negotiate with donations to, I want to know who has it, who bought it. I want their contact information. And if a donation group won't do that, then I'm sorry, I have to decline donating to them. Mm-hmm. And so I think, you know, you become the master of your career. I don't buy into you're going to get all this exposure and stuff, because that's very overrated. But if it's my group of people, if it's a charity that I'm passionate about and want to support, I will weigh that into the consideration of what I give. I also ask, what are they planning? Like, who's coming? Is this a gala where people paid $500 for a ticket and they're probably going to have the income to buy one of my paintings? Or is this a free come as you may, and you know, you'll be lucky if somebody pays $25 or $50 for your art? So you don't want to devalue your own art if you can avoid it. So the other thing you can negotiate if you donate art is, can you be the featured artist? Can you go there and maybe do a little talk about your piece and try to, you know, raise more money for the organization, and then use that as a way of standing out from the crowd of other silent auction items.
And I kind of limit myself to 2 donations a year, just because it can be overwhelming with all the asks. And so I have several groups that I'm fairly consistent with donations. And one thing that I appreciate by one group in particular is they always ask me what a base price would be, so that, like in a silent auction situation, you know, what would be a base price for this piece? You know, approximately what would you expect to get for it? And then they have a formula for subtracting $100 or something from that, so that it has a substantial price range, not only in terms of the money that they will receive as a donation for someone purchasing the painting, but also for your base, so that you don't have, you know, patrons and people who purchased your work seeing your work at a silent auction going away for $100 when they paid $800 for something very similar. So it does get a little bit complicated.
It does. It's really, it's hard. I know for me, I have been known to ask for a minimum bid, and to make note of the fact that if the painting doesn't sell, that it comes back to me, that it doesn't just sit in somebody's closet somewhere after me having donated. I know it is an issue though, like when you're trying to sell your work for a higher price, say, than the ticket of a dinner and drinks. It's in some ways it feels as if you could be undermining yourself when you allow your painting to be obtained for $150, and you know that the value's, you know, significantly more than that, or you paid that much for the frame.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, those are issues definitely to think about if you're being asked to give your work away. Let's we have Nikki shared with us, or with me, that that she might establish a budget for donations each year and stick to it. And I think Maura, you said that that's kind of your strategy, that you've got a couple that you do. I'm kind of the same way. There's a couple that I typically take part in, and then I do charitable donation all the time, so I don't feel bad about saying no to some groups, because you just can't support everything, right?
Right.
Rebecca, one of my mentors developed a form, and on that form it had what was the mission of the charity, when is the event, are tickets to the event going to be supplied to the artist so they can be in attendance free of charge, and some information about, you know, could they be featured as an artist. And what they told me, because they were getting so many asks, they started asking any charity that wanted them to donate to fill out their form. And they put the form on their website and said, you can go to my website and download the form, and then you can send it back to me and we'll get back to you. And he said he was able to eliminate a lot of the people asking, because a lot of times they don't want to go to that trouble of filling out the information and telling you about the charity and tell you about their mission, what they're going to do with the money, and can you have, you know, your stipulations of finding out who got your piece, and being invited to the event, and so that eliminated a lot of asks, because it takes a special charity to go ahead and fill out all that information to get
I love that idea. That is a great idea. Another super nugget from you. Thanks for sharing that.
Rebecca.
Yeah.
Hey, I love the idea of a form, and I'll tell you a little experience I had, and from now on I will do a form. Thank you, William, Rebecca. I appreciate that input. I had given to a very affluent charity, if you will, here locally, a print, and it was not framed. It was matted but not framed. And when I went to the event, someone had, one of the organizers of the thing had framed this print in a horrible frame that didn't even fit the print. And so the borders on one side were, you know, here, and then the top was here. It was awful. I was mortified. I was absolutely mortified. I thought, oh my word, you know, people are going to, what will people think, of
Right,
me?
right.
So if I were to do a form, I would certainly also put some sort of caveat on there that that the whatever it is cannot be modified in any way. You wouldn't think that'd be necessary, but it was in my case. So I just put that out there as a warning or a something.
Thank you for sharing that. I think so often what we learn is learned the hard way, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's right.
it's, I guess that's partly why I wanted to do this discussion is I feel as if I wish that maybe I had people or knew where to go to find people who were further along the path maybe than I when I was first starting out, because so often the things I've learned because I made mistakes, and that sounds horrifying, because yeah, you want to be what's out there representational of what you would like it to look like, and how you would want to present your work. And I know that can be a problem for me when I enter shows. And that's another question I wanted to talk about, was the importance of art organizations and art shows. But I know some of the shows that go on, they require you to frame according to their standards, which may or may not be, in your estimation as the artist, what presents your work in the best light. And I know that's been a frustration for me in the past. And the South Carolina Water Media show often has required me to unframe a painting and reframe it according to their standards, which adds expense and then sort of leads me to just shake my head and say, oh, it looked way better the way I had it before. What's your feeling about, and what would be your advice about art organizations and participation in shows?
Shall I take that one?
Sure, just jump in.
Yeah, first. Okay. So I think this is a real important question because, again, for young and emerging artists, I think entering exhibitions, whether they're open exhibitions or juried exhibitions, is very important. There's a lot of learning that goes on by entering your work into an exhibit. And yes, the South Carolina Watercolor or Water Media Society does have strict restrictions on framing, and the rationale for that has been that they want their paintings to read as a unified group, because it is a show that of artists from all over several states now showing in one exhibition. And so the framing, if it's somewhat limited, looks more unified as an exhibition should. So I understand the rationale for that. And I would suggest that any of young artists that are just, putting their foot in the water of getting into juried shows, to read that perspective twice and three times very closely, because they, if you enter a piece, and I can, from my own experience, tell you a story of entering a watercolor painting and getting into a show in Colorado, and then sometimes it's months before you hear from a juror whether your work is in or not. And it just so happened that I was looking at the painting one day and figured it needed a little more enhancement, so I actually got in there, did some stitchery, and sewed a few little beads in there. And the juror report came back, it was accepted, so I shipped it out to Colorado to the tune of $150. And then I get a phone call.
Yeah.
We don't allow mixed media in the show, and you have some stitching and beads in there. And since you went to the expense of shipping it out here, we will hang it in a hallway. It won't be in the main exhibition space. It won't be, considered for any kind of award or anything, which I got all that. That was fine. So you know, it is really important to pay attention to what the restrictions are, and I learned that the hard way. So I have a vision of my watercolor painting hanging somewhere in a hallway right between the restrooms. We're coming into the exhibit.
Yeah, that's so funny. It's not funny, but it's just so true that when entering a show, I guess my advice would be very similar. Read that prospectus and then keep track of the dates, and also be thinking that if you're going to be entering the same painting in different shows, keep track of when that painting is going to be required to be somewhere other than in your possession, because it's possible, especially on the national level, for shows to overlap. And so you can't necessarily have the same painting in more than one show. And, you know, so you just kind of have to, that's why shows are so problematic for me, because wrapping my mind around deadlines and prospectuses, and I mean, it's so much trouble. The great part about being in shows is that you can see how your work is being received. It's another way of getting feedback on the work that you're doing. It's also a wonderful way to be part of the art community, which I think is an important thing. And, you know, the awards can be nice. Generally, they don't offset whatever costs are involved in framing and shipping and all of that, you know, because the award is going to be now and again. It's not going to necessarily be every time. But I do think it's a good way to get out there and get some feedback on your work, honest appraisal of your work. So,
and even refusals of a work, you know, are something that you can learn from. You know, I mean, there's many reasons why a specific piece might not make it into a show, but you know, as the artist, I think it's an opportunity really to take a look at your work and to you know, consider, okay, what can I do to, you know, improve this, or where else do I need to maybe take this strain of thought or concept or technical application. So
yeah.
I had a comment about the shows, and there's been a lot of changes with the way that paintings are entered over the last few years. So you have to have a certain size photograph, and you have to have all these rules. And it's really kind of excluding a lot of the older folks in my watercolor group, which is about 70 people. And there's a lot of people who haven't entered these shows anymore because they can't do it. What they do is they take a picture of it with their camera, and it's, you know, 5 megabyte, and, you know, they send it and it says it was rejected, it's too big. And I know why the rules are in place, but it's kind of unfortunate that a lot of these people are now being excluded because they just don't grasp the technology. It didn't used to be like that.
You are so right, Keith. I think that would be one piece of advice I would have for every emerging artist. And, you know, Maura, you deal with a lot of young artists, and I've noticed a lot of your comments going to the young, but I would say that I would love to see that term young be substituted with early developing artists, because a lot of the people that I deal with in my art community are midlifers, or maybe even late in lifers, but they're pursuing the craft and they're learning, and I do believe that learning is as legitimate at 70 as it is at 17. Sure. And so I keep that in mind, folks, that if you're out there and you're not 20 and you're just starting out, it's okay. And everybody starts somewhere. But I do think, Keith, circling back to what you said, that it is a challenge for those of us of a certain age to master the technology. And one thing I would totally totally recommend is that you spend some time as an artist getting to know your phone, knowing how to take a good photograph, knowing how to edit your photographs to represent them as best you can. Because if you're going to enter a show or you're going to put your media or put your work out on social media, you have to have a decent photograph. And I think photography is becoming one of those essential skills that every artist kind of has to have under their belt. Do you guys feel that way?
Oh, definitely. Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is why in the next couple of, I wanted to just plug a little bit of what's going to be going on the next 2 Fridays. Next Friday, I'm going to be talking about as a Friday freebie, for those of you who are out there, I'm going to be talking about how to photograph and hints for how to represent your work through photography. And if either of you would like to join me for that discussion, I'd like to welcome you back for that as well. I don't pretend to be a photographer, but I would like to share just some of the things I've learned about that particular topic next Friday on the 24th. That would be April 24th. The following Friday, which believe it or not is going to be May 1st. How is that even possible? But May 1st, we'll be talking about how to keep an inventory. Some ideas for how you could think about doing that, because that would be another piece of advice that I would give emerging artists, would be to start now. Start keeping an inventory of your work now. If you haven't done it before, start today with any new work and try to maybe amass a collection of photos and descriptions of work that you've done in the past. How do you guys feel about inventory? Is that a basic that you feel like needs to be addressed?
Definitely. And I recently, I started kind of my art painting career versus corporate career in 2003, and kind of became a full-time artist in 2012. But it really wasn't until 2014, 15 that I started that inventory. And now I use Artwork Archive, and I have over 1,200 photographs of artwork that I've done, both past and present. And the amount of information that I've been able to store and know about my own work was instrumental when dealing with Liz Miller at the Art Museum for a collection of my work. I was able to show her all of the work that not only that I had in my studio, but that were owned by collectors. So we were able to go to several collectors and ask them if we could show that work in the retrospective.
Gosh,
So
that's like a best case scenario reason to prepare now for the future, because you just don't know, right?
yeah.
And as technology changes, it becomes challenging, because back in the 70s and 80s, when I was coming up with my portfolio of work, everything was cataloged in terms of slides. I mean, physical slides that went to a slide projector. And I have boxes of those. And then, of course, the new technologies of the 90s, going to digital imagery. So I have a variety of images of my work over the years. What I haven't done at this point and need to do is somehow unify that into an archive, such as what you were talking about, William, that would get everything under one roof, so to speak.
I also use Artwork Archive to organize and keep track of, and also to make it available to collectors.
Is that a paid service, Artwork Archive?
It is. It is. And oh, another one of those expenses to add to William's list. I think your idea of a spreadsheet is another good way. Victoria, you offered up to everyone that you keep a spreadsheet inventory of your artwork and also note each time a piece is in a show and where or whether it's sold, etc. I think that's great. And I hope that if you're interested in learning more about methods for inventory keeping, that you'll think about coming back on Friday for that Friday freebie where we'll try to limit the discussion a little bit to that of an inventory. I'd also like to just talk a little bit, if I could. I'm going to share my screen. This is going to be a class that I'm going to be giving on Wednesday of this coming week. It's going to be a Zoom lesson where I'll talk about the watercolor methods I used to paint this painting. And so that'll be coming up this week on Zoom. And then I also want to show you, let's see. This will be the following week. Wait, where's that one? Sorry about that. Bear with me, guys. This one. This one will be the second one. They're basically two turtle watercolor paintings. And my goal for that is to show you two different ways to approach the same subject. So I would love to invite you to come and paint along with me. I've got a PDF of the sketch that I used for both of these. And I would love to think about having you come to class. It's a fun thing that I normally like to do in person, but in light of the situation here, you know, that we're all in, I'm hoping to just sort of pivot and still keep a connection to the art community out there and to my students in particular. So if you've not studied with me before, I would love to have you join me this coming Wednesday. And I've got to just open it up to, are there any final questions that everyone would like to pose here? Any final thoughts, Maura, that you'd like to share about things that you'd like to give as hints to any emerging artists out there?
Well, I would just say, you know, just keep working. Don't wait for the muse to descend upon you to, you know, move you to work. Do something every day. And if you don't have a studio space for yourself, carve out a little corner of a room, somewhere where you can set up your work, have it available so that it's right there to slide into, even if you spend 2 hours in it. And just keep observing. Observe nature, observe life, put it into your work, and enjoy the process. Because if it's not fun, you're not going to do it.
That is so true. That is so true. I think that I would encourage people to think of the art world as a growing pie, not a finite pie. One that the more successful artists that are out there, the better for all of us in the art world. And so celebrate one another's victories, encourage each other. You know, just don't fall into the trap that because somebody else is experiencing something wonderful that somehow means that there's less for you to enjoy. I don't believe that. And I really think I would encourage you also to take a moment to think about why you're painting. I think sometimes we fall into this trap of the things that we think we should do. We should enter shows. We should, you know, be in a gallery. We should be selling our work. If that doesn't bring you joy, it doesn't delegitimize your artistry or your art practice. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Maura, that it should be fun. It should be fun, and don't let the shoulds rob you of the fun of it.
And I would add to that it's called artwork for a reason. and that there's a lot of work that goes into it, not just on the actual inspiration and creativity and creation of it, but then the marketing and the sales and the framing and all the decisions you have to make along the way, and what shows should you be in, and are those the right shows for me, etc. But I think any obstacle that you hit, if you're not having fun and you don't enjoy it, then there's probably a way that you could find somebody to pay them to take that off your plate so that you focus on what you really enjoy. You know, there's many artists that create and they use a gallery because the gallery will take care of the marketing and the sales, and they don't want to be involved in that. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice. And I've definitely had to do that, because in order to do some of the communication and digital things in my world, that was not necessarily fun for me. So I'm so grateful that I have Becca in my life. She's just been a godsend. I think I don't want to overstay our welcome here with everybody. It's been a joy to speak with all of you. Maura, it's so nice to meet you. I hope we can spend some real time together one day. And for those of you who are familiar faces, it was wonderful to see you. Those of you who joined and maybe we're getting acquainted this way, I'm really appreciative of you taking the time to join us today. Thank you for taking the time and being part of this community. I wish you well, and I wish you good health. And I hope you'll continue to stay in touch for the Freebie Fridays, and perhaps join me for an actual class sometime soon. You can look for William Miller. Where can we find you online? What's your online presence?
Either on Facebook or williamhmiller.com.
Okay, great. And Maura, can you tell us again where we can find you?
Yes, on Instagram, Maura Kenny Art, on a website, maurakenny.com, at the Island Art Gallery here in Pawleys Island. I think that's it.
Okay, and for those of you interested in looking me up, you can find me as Rebecca Z Artist on Facebook and Instagram, and you can look for me on my website, RebeccaZArtist.com. So with that, I'm going to sign off and say happy Friday. Thank you all. I enjoyed this discussion tremendously, and I hope we can do it again next Friday. Take care, everybody.
Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Okay, I've got to stop this.